Well, what a privilege to be here in this distinguished place of worship with so many proud Canadians who are proudly determined to be part of our independent country that we call Canada, right? We have some very special Canadians with me today. I want to acknowledge them, some friends. First of all, Lana, thank you for that very kind introduction. We have President Dan Steiner. Thank you to the President for hosting us today. We have Member of Parliament all the way from Winnipeg, my good friend Marty Morantz. Marty. MP from here in British Columbia, we have Mark Dalton. Candidates, Tamara Cronus, Ken Charco, Mary Rogers, Slavinsky, one of the organizers of this incredible event. And of course, you, Rabbi. Thank you very much for hosting me. Rabbis are known for wisdom. In fact, I think the word has its root in the word teacher, does it not? And there's a story about Rabbi Moskowitz that many people don't know. There was a young, inquisitive Jewish boy who came to the shul, always asking questions. And after a while, he started to become plucky and precocious and wanted to challenge the rabbi, see if he could outsmart him. So he would show up every week with a new and more difficult question. And every time, the rabbi would come back with an answer. And so he showed up with riddles. And again, the rabbi always found a way to get out of the rhetorical trap. So one day, the little boy showed up, and he had trapped a butterfly, and he had it in his hand. And he said to the rabbi, "This butterfly, is it alive, or is it dead?" Now, if the rabbi were to say that it was alive, then he was going to squeeze that little butterfly and prove the rabbi wrong. And if the rabbi said that it was dead, well, he would open his hands, the little boy would, and that butterfly would flap its wings up to the heavens, again, proving the rabbi wrong. No right answer, therefore. Rabbi, you gave him the best answer of all. You said, "Young man, the answer is in your hands." And indeed, that is the story of Canada. Lana mentioned the promise of Canada. So too did the rabbi. And that there is the promise of Canada. Why did so many waves of immigrants cross the oceans to arrive in this cold, desolate place? Some of you are looking a little bit traumatized because it's the first time British Columbians have seen snow. Outside of Whistler, that is. But the answer is not because they would be showered with all kinds of free gratuities, that they would be given all kinds of generous gifts that would come freely to them. It's because they wanted to chart their own course, make their own decisions, live their own lives, and decide their own futures. They were ready to earn it. They wanted freedom and not free stuff. They wanted to go to a place where the answer would always be in their hands. That's something that made this place precious. When I was just a little boy, I learned these lessons from my parents, school teachers who adopted me from a 16-year-old single mother who had put me up for adoption. She was too young to raise me and had just lost her own mom. And I remember we used to come to British Columbia, as all Albertans do. We're that alien species that invades, but only ever in the summer and the winter. And we arrived in Penticton. I saw these kids tearing around on what were then brand new things to me. They're called Sea-Doos, jet skis. And I said to my dad, I want to tear around on one of those. And he said, "We can't afford it, but I'll rent you one of those little pedal boats. They're $5 an hour, the little yellow things, and you can pedal your way out." And surely I did, and the rich kids came and splashed me with their Sea-Doos, and I went back to the side of the beach, and I said to my dad, "This is very unfair. I'm being humiliated out there. you've given me this little pedal boat. And he said, I'll make you a deal. When you're 16, you'll have worked hard in little odds and end jobs, and you'll have saved enough money that we will lend you our minivan. You can gas it up with your own money. You can drive out to this campground. You can rent yourself a little place, and then you can go rent yourself a Sea-Doo. And you can do it all by yourself. In other words, if you want something, you have to work for it. But if you do work for it in Canada, the deal is that you got it. That you got a good house. You got good, nutritious food. You got to live on a safe street. You didn't have to be terrorized because of your faith or your identity. That hard work would pay off with a powerful paycheck and pension that would buy affordable food, gas, and homes in safe neighborhoods. And that you would know that you lived in an independent and sovereign country that controlled its own destiny. That was the Canadian promise. Today, we see that promise is under threat. Most recently, by the unjustified and unjustifiable tariffs now imposed by US President Donald Trump. This attack on our sovereignty is unacceptable. It would be unacceptable from any country, but worst of all from our neighbor, for whom we have been a loyal and undying friend for centuries, with whom we have died on battlefields, that we have fought to defend, and that we have always been there. But what is also troubling is the vulnerability with which we enter into this latest crisis. You know, ask yourself some questions. Why is it that we sell twice as much to the Americans as we sell to other Canadian provinces? Well, because we don't have free trade between the provinces. We have anywhere between a 7 and a 20% tariff on the goods that travel from one province to the next. So if you wanted to find a country with which you would replace the Americans as your #1 trading partner, it might start with ourselves. Let's make Canada our #1 trading partner. Well, how do we do it? Well, again, the answer is in our hands. It will be politically difficult, even though it seems like a no-brainer, because there will always be a corporation that is protected against competition by a politician and a bureaucrat in each of the provinces that wants to protect their little empire. And that's why we have such difficulty in moving goods from one province to another. Take trucking, for example. We have different trucking rules in each province. Well, that's a problem when trucks go from province to province. In fact, there are rules guiding truckers that they have to drive just during daylight, but can you believe it? We can't agree from one province to another on what is daylight. Maybe we need to shed some light on that problem and have a national definition of what constitutes daylight so our truckers know when they can drive and when they can't. Apparently, a truck is dangerous at a certain weight load in New Brunswick, but not dangerous in neighboring Nova Scotia because the weight loads are different. So what is the trucker supposed to do when he gets to a provincial boundary? Dump 1,000 kilograms of freight on the side of the highway? Or maybe not ship it at all, or maybe just ship it all to the United States so that we're ever more dependent on them. No, we need to bring together the premiers of this country and agree to knock down all the barriers so that we have truly pan-Canadian free trade, one Canadian free market of consumers, of workers, of Canadians buying from and supporting other Canadians. In our hands. You mentioned healthcare, Rabbi. Here we have a healthcare shortage. We have 20,000 immigrant doctors and 32,000 immigrant nurses that cannot work in Canada because there is no way for them to prove their qualifications. When I went and got my eye surgery, I met a technician there who works as an eye surgeon in Dubai 10 days a month, and then comes back to his family where he works as a technician because we won't license him. Apparently, Emirati eyeballs are different than Canadian eyeballs. I note that the UAE is actually a more developed and advanced country than Canada. He's good enough for them, but not for us. They say in Toronto, if you have a heart attack, don't call 911. Call an Uber because the driver is probably a doctor. So 85% of Filipino nurses in Canada can't work as nurses. In the States, they can take a test in a few weeks and prove that they're up to the American standard and get working. We have a solution. The answer, Rabbi, as you would say, is in our hands. We know because we already answered the problem back in 1952 when we agreed on a national standard for the licensed trades. You want to be a mechanic, you take the Red Seal program and test, you prove you can be a mechanic, you get a stamp, you can work anywhere in Canada. Why don't we do the same thing for the professions? A Blue Seal standard, so anyone, including Canadian kids trained at foreign medical schools, can come back, quickly take a test, prove they're qualified, and let's get these thousands of people working in our hospitals. The answer's in our hands, but it means we're going to have to take some tough stances, and there might be licensing bodies that won't be happy losing their power. But the answer is for us to take back control of these decisions. You know, I find it rather hilarious that today we're concerned that the US president might put tariffs on our energy products when we've spent the last 10 years blocking our own energy sector from reaching any other market. Let's get this straight. We have the third biggest supply of oil anywhere on Earth, and we're importing 120,000 barrels every single day, mostly from Saudi Arabia. Almost all of our oil, about 90%, is going to the United States at a massive price discount. On an average day, we get about $15 below the global price. You know how much we sell in a day to the Americans? 4 million barrels. So do the math on that. We're talking like $60 million a day in discounts that we're giving the Americans so that they can take our raw materials, mark it up to the global price, and keep all the profits for themselves. This is the famous trade deficit President Trump is complaining about. He says he's buying more from us than we are from them. We're giving him stuff. Like, you know, there's an old expression, if somebody's throwing money out the window, stand next to the window. And frankly, that's what we've been doing, because we can't get our product to any other market. We have the 5th biggest supply of natural gas anywhere on Earth, and we don't sell a single cubic foot of it outside of North America, even though the Germans, the French, the Greeks, the Japanese, and many others have said they are desperate to break their dependence on Russia and Qatar. But our Prime Minister says there's no business case to sell natural gas. So what does that mean? Europe keeps funding Putin by buying his gas. And now they're funding Qatar, which housed Hamas. France signed a 30-year supply agreement with the Qataris, who've doubled their production. Apparently they see a business case. The Americans have built 7 liquefaction plants in the last 9 years, and Canada has not completed a single one. The brilliant Squamish people had to wait 14 years to get licensed to begin building an LNG plant. And Chief Dale, when he took me to the future site, there was an old mill there that had contaminated the location. And he told me the story that his dad pulled him. But they went out on the water and they looked over at that mill, and his dad said to him, "Son, you couldn't get hired as a janitor there because they don't hire our kind of people." Now, he is a part owner in the LNG plant that will be completed, and it will be the most environmentally friendly LNG plant anywhere on the earth. It will enrich the entrepreneurial Squamish people, and it will supply the world with clean, green, Canadian liquefied natural gas. We need to do that thousands of times over. But the answer is in our hands. Right now, it takes 19 years to get a mine approved in Canada. So we don't mine lithium, even though we have the 5th biggest supply. We don't export gas even though we have the 6th biggest supply. We can't supply our own energy even though it's right beneath our feet. We need to repeal these anti-energy laws and replace them with simplified, fast approval of natural resource projects that will protect the environment, consult and compensate First Nations, but get decisions made so that we can bring home the hundreds of billions of dollars of resource production that will make us independent, self-reliant, and a lot richer. And that's what we have the best case for natural gas. And you talked about the environment. The biggest reduction in greenhouse gases in the history of the world was when the Americans discovered fracking. Even though the so-called environmentalists opposed fracking, what fracking did is it produced an abundance of very low-cost natural gas that powered the electrical grid. And what did it replace? Much dirtier coal. And so America's emissions have dropped more since they discovered fracking than have Canadian emissions. We brought in carbon taxes to punish people for using energy. We attacked our energy sector, and the Americans were able to reduce their emissions more than we were. Why? Because the solution to fighting climate change and lowering emissions is not taxing and regulating our people and industries into poverty. It's unleashing a massive abundance of clean, green energy to displace dirtier forms. It is through richness and wealth. We have the shortest shipping distance. You know how long it takes to get to Asia from British Columbia? By ship, 11 days. From the States, from the southern Gulf Coast, it takes 20 days. We have cold weather. You don't know anything about cold weather here. I have no idea. In Ottawa, it gets so cold, there are sometimes politicians seen with their hands in their own pockets. The teeth like that one. Oh my goodness. We've got to make fun of ourselves once in a while, I think. But the great thing about cold weather is that it helps liquefy gas. It's actually 25% less energy intensive to liquefy gas in Canada than in the US Gulf Coast, because you have about 11 degrees less you have to pull out of the gas to turn it into a liquid. And we have clean, green hydroelectricity in British Columbia, Newfoundland, and Quebec that could power that liquefaction process and break dependence. You know, the Indians are planning to use coal for their electrical grid. If we gave them enough natural gas to displace half of their future coal, it would displace 2.5 billion tons of greenhouse gases, which is equal to 3 times the emissions of all of Canada. That is a far better way to fight climate change than to impoverish our people with endless taxes and to block the First Nations from having their chance at economic independence. And furthermore, Chief, I want you to know, I'm going to allow companies that get the consent of First Nations to pay a share of their federal corporate taxes directly to local First Nations communities to create economic independence so that the First Nations people do not have to go to Ottawa to ask for their money back in the future. The answer is in our hands. Why don't we have homes in this country? Why is it that Vancouver is now the 3rd most expensive housing market in the world? The most expensive anywhere in North America. Worse than New York, Los Angeles, and Chicago. Housing costs in Vancouver are 50% higher than they are in Seattle, even though Seattle workers earn about 30% more than Vancouverites. Same is true when you make the comparison between Toronto and Chicago or other major metropolises across this country. We have the worst housing costs anywhere in the G7. How is that possible? Let's think about this for a second. Housing should be dirt cheap in Canada because we have the most dirt to build on. By far. We have over 10 times more land per person than the second closest G7 country. And yet we have the fewest homes per capita. They have more homes per capita in Japan than we do here in Canada. Why? We have the land. We spend twice as much as a share of GDP on home building. We have the most mortgage debt, so we're borrowing more to build homes. So where are the homes? What's stopping them? The answer is government. In Vancouver today, 60% of the cost of every newly built home is government. It is government taxes, fees, charges, delays, land set-asides, and more. More money from a newly built home in Vancouver goes to bureaucrats than goes to the carpenters, electricians, and plumbers who actually build the homes. This is insane. Social justice? The single biggest driver of the gap between the rich and the poor is real estate. Very simple. When housing costs are unaffordable, the poor can never afford a home, and the very wealthy get much wealthier because their housing values go up. That's the biggest driver of poverty and despair. It's why we have such an increase in mental health problems, because our youth believe they will never be able to start a family or have kids. There's nowhere to put the kids. So what's the solution? We have to cut through the governmental obstacles to build the homes. I will start by eliminating the federal GST on new homes to save up to $50,000. I'll pressure the provinces to do the same to bring that savings over $100,000. And I will put in place powerful financial incentives to get the municipalities to speed up permits, free up land, and cut development taxes so that we can build 15% more homes every year. The answer is in our hands. Let's build the homes that we need for the future. In this country, we now spend more on taxes than we do on food, clothing, and shelter combined. And what are we getting for our money? Look at the state of our infrastructure, our health care, and our other programs. They've gotten no better as our taxes have gotten higher and higher. The problem is, the great Marty Morantz pointed out at the Finance Committee, where we served together, is that the spending is out of control. You know, they came to the committee once and they said, we're not going to have to worry about taxing for the money. We're just going to print it. We're going to print the cash. And this is back in 2020. And Marty put up his hand and he said, my dad taught me when I was a little boy that if governments print money, you get inflation. Didn't they have that in the Weimar Republic? And the bureaucrats said, oh, that's old-fashioned thinking. Well, it turns out old-fashioned thinking can actually be right. The old rules repeat themselves over and over again. The problem is we're creating too much cash to fund too much government. The bureaucracy is metastasized. The bureaucracy is now 100,000 more people than it was a decade ago. To do what? We are spending twice as much on consultants as we did a decade ago. That works out to $1,400 per Canadian family spent on consultants. We're giving out $40 billion in checks to mostly large corporations, supposedly to create jobs and become more productive as our unemployment rises and our productivity drops. This is insane. We have to stop creating cash. It means capping government spending with a dollar-for-dollar law that requires we find $1 of savings for every new dollar of spending, and eliminate the waste. Remove government bureaucrats through attrition as they retire. 17,000 retire every year. We don't need to replace every single one of them. We can gradually wean the bureaucracy off its massive addiction to our money so that we can stop printing and lower the tax burden, making hard work once again pay off. We want this to be a country where ambition is rewarded. And so we will cut taxes, and it will start with eliminating the capital gains tax increase. Bring the money pouring back in. I will pass a massive bring-it-home tax cut on energy, work, investment,
home building and making stuff in this country to bring home the hundreds of billions of dollars that have already left our country before the tariffs for the United States. I want to bring them home to this country so that we have a robust economy that produces the goods it needs, and we as a nation can once again stand on our own 2 feet. We will retaliate against American tariffs. We will narrowly target that retaliation against things that we can make in Canada, things that we don't need, or things that we can buy elsewhere. But we will also remove the tariffs that we impose on ourselves by lowering the tax and the regulatory burden that holds us back and taking back control of our own economic destiny. You know, and I think that means as well taking back control of our streets and making this a safe country once again. Chaos, drugs, and disorder. Violent crime is up 60%. Gun crime, 116%. Car thefts, we've lost 48,000 people to fentanyl overdoses, more than died, fighting for Canada in the Second World War, if you can believe it. And of course, we have chaos in our streets with these rampant anti-Semitic rampages. They're not protests, they are conniption fits with a weird cocktail of extremists, religious extremists on the one hand, and woke radicals on the other, who can only agree on one thing, and that is that they don't like Canada. Actually, they agree on 2 things. They don't like Canada, and they don't like Jews. Those are the 2 things they agree on. They tear apart our flag. You know, we're going to take back control of our streets. I'll come back to the anti-Semitism in a moment, but let me start with crime. It's a very simple problem. It starts with the good news. We don't have a lot of criminals in Canada. Then there's the bad news. The criminals we have are very productive. You know, here in Vancouver, they had to arrest the same 40 offenders 6,000 times. You ask how is it they were released every second day, each one? They weren't. They were released every second hour. They are automatically released under liberal crime laws. C-75 requires they automatically be released on bail, even if they have literally dozens or hundreds of prior convictions. And then when they're convicted again, they get house arrest. So you steal a car, you get to do your sentence in your living room, watching Netflix or playing Grand Theft Auto. A terrible penalty, or you walk out the front door and steal another car while you're technically serving a prison sentence. Insane. It's a very simple problem to fix. We have to repeal these laws and bring in a new law that says anyone with a long rap sheet of serious crime will be ineligible for bail, parole, probation, or house arrest. It will be jail, not bail, jail, not bail. Secondly, we have to secure our borders. We need to cut back office bureaucracy and put the borders. Scan every shipping container that comes in to stop the guns, drugs, human trafficking, and other contraband from moving between our ports of entry. Second, we need to control who comes into our country. We need to ensure that terrorists do not enter. We will better screen and keep out terrorists and terrorist sympathizers from entering into Canada. And if anyone is here on a permit or visa who participates in anti-Semitic violence, they will be deported when I'm coming. And not only that, we will hunt down the 700 members, active members of the IRGC. expel from this country those who are not. We will repossess their assets, assets that they stole from the Iranian people. And we will set aside those assets. And we will set aside those assets and make sure they are available to the courts to be awarded to victims of Iranian-funded terrorism. We will put our country first again. We will get back to the Canadian way. You know, the Canadian way is very simple. You come here, you're a Canadian. You're a Canadian first. Sure, you can be a Jew or a Gentile. You can be a Muslim, Hindu, or Sikh. But that doesn't mean you fight with your next door neighbor if they happen to be from a different group. That's not for hundreds of years there have been fighting between different groups in other parts of the world, but when those groups came to Canada, they agreed that those problems stayed at the door. Remember, Protestants and Catholics tore each other's eyeballs out for hundreds of years in Europe, and they came over here, and they said, here, we get along. And if we have a squabble, we argue about it. And if we're still not happy, we argue some more. And eventually we get tired of arguing and we move on to something more productive. But we don't firebomb each other's places of worship. We don't fight each other. We get along and we get on with the job of being Canadian. It means that we get to keep our personal identities, our religious convictions, our diverse cultures and practices, but we ultimately put our country first, and we recognize that the reason we came here was to put those dangers and those fights behind us and work towards the common good of our people. That was the purpose of Canada. And we will restore that, including by rebuilding our Canadian armed forces, and they will be guided by a warrior culture. On the world stage, we will once again take a principled stand in favor of our democratic allies. Rabbi, I said the answer is in your hands, and the answer here is in my hands. This is a beautiful stone, river stone. You and your family carved and inscribed the names of every single hostage, murdered Canadian, who was a victim of October 7th. Here we have the murdered Canadians on this particular stone, but all of the other victims are on the stones that you and your family inscribed and that are seen in that beautiful, beautiful tribute that you have outside. I have these names: Ben Mizrahi, Vivian Silver, Judith Weinstein Haggai, Adi Batal Kaplan, Alexandra Look, Neda Epstein, Shir Gori, Tefret Lepidel. Canadians. How fitting that you would put it on a stone, because stones last. I know that Jews have a beautiful tradition of putting stones on top of gravestones as a way of saying, we're still here, we still love you, we haven't forgotten you. How fitting an analogy for the Jewish people themselves. I've been 3 times to Israel now and fell in love with its people. That's one of the reasons why I'm so driven to defend Israel's right to exist and its ability to fight for its ongoing existence against the genocidal enemies all around it. When I was in Israel, I was the guest of a beautiful Jewish family originally from Canada, Rabbi Ephraim Shor. He went to study, he was a teacher at the Eshatori Yeshiva in Jerusalem. And I was able to stay with him in a place called Beitar. You heard of Beitar? And so I got on the bus in Jerusalem. And I was the only guy on the bus. I was out of place that the bus driver didn't believe me that I had any good reason. So I said, I'm going to stay with this rabbi you framed short. They go, well, you better call him up because I want to ask him if he's real. So they got him on the phone, by cell phone, and the bus driver started interrogating. And then they passed the cell phone around to other people on the bus to confirm it was actually true. At the time, I was a 20-year-old kid, goofy kid from Canada. So finally, they agreed to take me out to his home. There, I spent a Shabbos dinner around the table with his 7 kids. And I thought for a second he might have been Catholic or something. Anyway, well, what I remarked upon in that beautiful evening was that those 7 kids were singing the same Hebrew songs on the same Hebrew land as their ancestors would have sung 3,000 years ago. The Jewish people are the only people who have survived speaking the exact same language and worshiping on the exact same land, the exact same faith as 3 millennia ago. This is the testament to the enduring and eternal strength of the Jewish people, to be proud of who they are, to celebrate their common values and ancestries, and to keep alive the contract between the dead, the living, and the yet to be born. Now, as we as Canadians feel that our nation is under threat, let us draw inspiration from the courageous Jewish people. If they can survive 3,000 years, they can rebuild a homeland after having been scattered across the earth, then surely we here in Canada can unite for common purpose, to defend what is ours, to uphold what is good, to celebrate our proud traditions and pass them down to the generations to come so that they too will enjoy the great Canadian promise that was made to all of us. Canada here, Canada now, Canada always. Let's bring it home. Thank you very much.